All right, I have 10:02. I guess we can get the workshop started. As I said, thank you everyone for attending this morning for the Regional Competitive Programs 2021 Call for Projects. This is the workshop. Next slide, please. So brief overview of the layout for today, do some brief introductions. I'll introduce my fellow presenters, agenda overview. We'll have presentations for the various areas that are involved with this call for projects. And then we have time built in to allow for questions after each presentation. I will ask and caution, we have a number of people on this call today. Please keep your phones muted unless you're asking a question. Also, if you could use, raise your hand or use the chat function, we have staff that will be monitoring that to make sure we get the questions answered. Going through our presenters, so I will actually be presenting the active transportation section. Next, the Avondale Goodyear Transit is Steph Stearns, a planner here at MAG. Doing the PM10 certified street sweepers is Dean Giles, our air quality project manager. Next, PM10, PM2.5 paved and unpaved roads, Steve Tate, another planner at MAG, will be presenting that. Next, the Pinal County Arterial Bridge Program. Samantha Samples, another planner at MAG, will be presenting that item. The next two items are being presented by the same person, Margaret Herrera, our Transportation Safety Program Manager, and she'll be doing roadway safety and the Safe Routes to Schools non-infrastructure. And then finally, the Systems Management Operations SM&O, that will be presented by Jeff Jank, our TISMO Program Manager. Moving on, next slide, please. So the first of the calls that we'll be discussing is active transportation. This is the bicycle and pedestrian. You will notice throughout our presentations today, a lot of the slide deck does look similar, but there are differences based on dates and dollars availability. So you'll see those as we move through the slide deck. Anyhow, all of the presentations we see today, all the calls today can actually be found on the MAG tip website. The web address is provided for you right there. Near the bottom of the page, there's a section for call for projects. You can either select current opportunities or past opportunities. If you select current, it'll take you to that page. And then certain applications in this call are actually online. They have a digital portal that was developed by MAG staff. It's a wonderful tool, and those can actually be accessed directly, which is at callsforprojects.azmag.gov. The three that are currently out there that are available are the bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure, the one we're talking about right here, the paving of unpaved roads, and then our PM10 certified street sweepers. With all of the calls, this notice was sent out to members of the Active Transportation Committee on August 2nd. This call is for bicycle and pedestrian improvements. One note, see, the call for projects for active transportation involves two funding sources. One is CMAQ, which is Congestion Mitigation Air Quality, and the second is Transportation Alternatives, or TA. Just a note that the CMAQ funding can only be used in non-attainment areas. And then finally, at the bottom of the page, you can find the link for the active transportation website. Moving on, next slide, please. Key dates. They're all key dates, honestly, but I really did want to emphasize a few dates. Obviously, the first one was the call was released on August 2nd. I could have highlighted the next date. Here we are today, August 19th, doing the workshop. And I'll mention it for my presentation. My other presenters won't necessarily need to cover this. We will have an open house next Tuesday, similar to the workshop, but instead of having actual presentations, staff will just be available to answer questions sort of in a free-form context. And then we will also have another open house if needed on September 2nd. That really is just based on need and availability. The invitation for the open house on the 24th will actually be going out after this meeting. After that, September 17th, this is the critical date for all the calls for projects. The applications are due at 10 o'clock. No late applications will be accepted. If you are going to be submitting projects, if you want to submit them early, that's great. We can certainly let you know we received that application. If you're running into issues, certainly reach out to myself or other members of the MAG team, and we can help you get through that process. For the Active Transportation Committee, by Friday, September 24th, The applications will be posted out for committee members to begin their review process. And then moving on to October, on the 19th of October, the Active Transportation Committee will actually have the presentations of the applications that were submitted. Because of the CMAQ funding on this in this program, the Air Quality Technical Advisory Committee actually reviews the projects as well, and they make a recommendation to rank the proposed projects. On the 16th of November, Active Transportation meets again to recommend the prioritized project listing. And then it moves into our committee cycle with TRC on December 16th, and then ultimately moving to the Management Committee and Regional Council in January of 2022. Next slide, please. You'll see this slide a lot throughout the day, so I want to call attention to the funding that is available for this call this year. So we have fiscal year 2025 funding is what this call is for. As I said, CMAQ and TA, just under $14 million. I apologize, we could have had the breakout on the slide, but I do have it. So of the funding available, CMAQ funding is just about $9.5 million, and transportation alternatives funding is about $4.5 million. And then we'll go through the other funding as we move through each of the presentations. Next slide, please. And that concludes my very short but informative, hopefully, presentation. And if there are any questions, we can certainly take those now. Specific to active transportation.
Patrick, this is Jason with the City of Chandler. In the past, we had been able to apply for both CMAQ and TA funding, but in the online portal, there's only an option to choose one or the other. If we choose CMAQ, would we still be eligible for the TA funding? How would that work?
Jason, a great question, and another of the active transportation committee members had that same thought and had sent out an email. Yes, you do have to select one of the funding types. My understanding is we will take those applications and they will be scored and evaluated against both funding sources. So if you pick CMAQ, but it really turns out this is a great TA project, it'll be scored and ranked, and it'll show up in that listing. And we'll make sure to get some clarification out on that. Hopefully early next week. We had a couple of questions on that.
Hi, Patrick. This is Marielle with the City of Phoenix.
Hi, Marielle.
I know that I should know this as a committee member. I know that the scoring system was updated. Do we still receive points on the presentation?
Marielle, great question. If I recall correctly, the update of the rankings went through Regional Council, I believe, in May, and I believe the presentation score was moved over to be scored as whether or not the project is part of the active transportation plan. So I believe the presentation score was actually pulled out of the evaluative process. But we will certainly, we'll follow up on that.
Okay, thanks.
No, not a problem. Good question. Other questions, active transportation? All right, I'm looking at the chat pod. I don't see anything. So we can move on to the next slide and move over to Steph Stearns, who will be presenting the Avondale Goodyear Urbanized Area Transit. Steph?
Thank you, Patrick, and good morning, everyone. Pleased to be here with you this afternoon. Similar to some of the other slides that Patrick has shown, on this slide you can find the application, the link to the application for the MAG website. This notice was sent out on August 2nd, and projects are only eligible if they are within the Avondale Goodyear urbanized area, which is the darker shade of blue on the regional map on the slide. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, August 2nd, the applications were released. This call for projects has the same due date of September 17th at 10 a.m. The applications will first be reviewed and ranked by members of the Avondale Goodyear Transit Working Group. That's a working group here at MAG. From there, once the group provides their consensus on their prioritized list of projects, it will then go through Transit Committee in November, and through the rest of the MAG committee process with ultimate regional council approval next January. Next slide, please. There is just over $1 million available for the Avondale-Goodyear urbanized area, and it's broken down into two major categories. Next slide, please. These categories are transit security and then associated transit improvements. Transit security projects are required by federal regs. We need to spend at least 1% of our annual apportionment on a transit security project. A transit security project is anything that will enhance the safety and security of the transit system. So things like personnel, security cameras, increased lighting. And then an associated transit improvement is really anything that's going to help transit improve it in any way. The limits are if it's a bike or ped route or a sidewalk to and from a bus stop, it needs to be within a half mile of a fixed route bus stop. But that's really the only limitation there. So anything to enhance increased transit. And of course, a transit security project, while we do have $112,000 available, that is our minimum. So if we maybe got $150,000 of security projects, the Avondale-Goodyear Working Group may decide, okay, we'll pull a little bit from associated transit improvements or ATIs and allocate that towards transit security. When you're doing your application, you don't need to worry too much about the apportionment years, whether you're applying for 2018, 2020, 22. That's something that we will work out in the scoring process, but that's just to let you guys know that we do have several years worth of funding available. And next slide, please. That is the conclusion of my presentation. Any questions?
Awesome. Thank you, Steph. Great presentation. Real quick before we jump into our next presenter, I wanted to follow up on Marielle's question. I was able to find the answer. It was March of 21 Regional Council approved that. And what they did, Marielle, is they took out the presentation score for both CMAQ and transportation alternatives. 5% was added to the quantitative scoring, and then 10% was then moved over to an active transportation plan identified route. So that was the update to the scoring that was done this year. Hopefully that answers your question on that item. Oh, perfect. Thank you. All right. Next, moving on, we have Dean Giles, who will be presenting the PM10 certified street sweepers. Dean?
Thank you, Patrick. MAG is soliciting for fiscal year 2022 PM10 certified street sweeper projects. The projects which should be located within the Maricopa PM10 or Pinal PM10 non-attainment areas and submitted by MAG member agencies. The application can be found on the MAG TIP website along with the supporting documentation and also directly on the call for projects page. It's anticipated that the street sweepers, although initially funded with CMAQ, will be reimbursed with non-federal funds. Next slide. So the schedule for the street sweepers includes the due date, September 17th at 10 o'clock. The street committee will be reviewing the applications at their October 12th meeting. And then the Air Quality Technical Advisory Committee will be making a recommendation on the prioritized list at their meeting on October 28th, followed by the MAG Management Committee on November 9th, and then the approval of the prioritized listing by the MAG Regional Council on December 1st. Next slide. This call for projects and the funding available for street sweepers is approximately 1.2 million. There is a 5.7% minimum local cash match requirement. Next slide, please. And we wanted to just touch on the the process that ADOT has established for disposing of grant-funded street sweepers. So many of you are familiar with this, but as some are beginning to look at disposing some of their older street sweepers that have reached the end of their useful life, we just wanted to mention this again. So as you begin to think about that, just keep this in mind that there is a formal process for disposal of the street sweepers. I won't read this here, but if you're interested in more detail about the disposal process, the ADOT policies and procedures document is out on the MAG website on the tip page. Thank you very much.
All right, any questions for Dean on the fiscal year 2022 street sweepers? All right, Dean, thank you very much. Moving on next. Yes, Dean.
You're welcome.
Yeah. Next is the PM10, PM2.5 paving. Steve Tate will be presenting this item. Steve. Steve? We may have lost Steve for the moment. I can certainly jump in on this item.
I'm here. I'm here.
Oh,
I'm here.
there he is. All right. Okay. Thank you, Steve.
I'm here. I just learned how to do the unmute button. Okay, this is the most exciting projects that we've got. They're paving dirt roads. We're going to be paving alleys, dirt roads, access points, and shoulders. The application is out on. It's an online application we have on the website. If you will need to set up an account to use that application. So please contact me if you need to set up an account. I guess to go to the next slide, please. Can you hear me? Good. Okay, the applications are due September 17th. No late applications will be accepted. I would strongly urge you to try to get it in a day before. If there are minor issues that need to be addressed or some minor incompletions, I would just send it in and we will work with you to complete it. We do want the most accurate and complete application we can, but if you send in a late application, it simply will not be accepted. I would expect that we're planning to do site visits for these projects if we can. It often helps us to identify problems that are not apparent in the applications or clear up issues that aren't present in the application. The street committee will hear the applications on October 12th. Just a second. Anyway, the street committee will hear the applications on October the 12th. The presentations will need to come from agency staff. Usually the slideshows for the presentations would be prepared by MAG. The focus of the presentation should be on the data that's in the application, specifically the traffic data, the cost estimate, and anything that would help us identify whether or not there's any fatal flaws in the application. Once that is done, the data will go to the air quality TAC. The air quality TAC will generate a air quality effectiveness score, and that air quality effectiveness score will be used in prioritizing projects at the street committee on November 9th. After that, the prioritized listings will go through the committee process, ending with regional council approval in January. Next slide, please. We have approximately $5.7 million, approximately $5.8 million in funding. There's a 5.7% match with that funding. Next slide, please. Yeah, any questions?
And everyone, real quick, just to if we could go back one slide, please, real quick. So the 5.8 million, I just wanted to give a breakdown of the funding because this is actually two funding sources. So it's right about $5 million in funding for CMAQ funding, and then about 760,000 in CMAQ 2.5. Just wanted to make sure we had that clear for agency staff. And all of these amounts are included with the fact sheet that was provided with the call and is also located on the website. Next slide, and then if we have any questions. All right, perfect. Thank you very much. Moving on next, we'll have Samantha Samples, who will be presenting the Pinal County Arterial Bridge Program. Samantha?
Thank you, Patrick. All right, so like the other applications, this one can be found on the TIP website, links here, or the application page. All the notice for the call for projects went out with everything else on August 2nd. These projects, because they're for the Pinal County portion of the MAG member agencies only, so it's only those members that are eligible. There's several program goals that we want to make sure that are being met. So it's expanding capacity on existing roadways or intersections of high demand, maintaining, maintaining and preserving the region's transportation system, addressing safety concerns for existing roadways and intersections, promoting connectivity between high demand areas and roadways, for advancing economic vitality, maintaining the consistency with the stated jurisdictional policy. And there's one other one that wasn't on the slide, which is achieving a significant reduction in congestion on the region's transportation system. So there's several different roadways that are eligible. It's limited to parkways, principal arterials, minor arterials, and major collectors. And some of this information, actually all of this information, is available on the website. It's listed here below. Gives all the details for the arterial bridge program. Next slide, please. Again, this one goes through the street committee initially. So we have the applications that were released. September 17th, 10 a.m. is when the applications are due. And if you can get anything in early, that would be wonderful. Let me know if you have any questions. We'll go in, we'll review them. September 24th, we'll have them on the website for the committee members to start the review. October 12th is the street committee presentations. So we'll have applications, those will be done. I'll put together and work with the member agencies to do the applications for the presentations, pardon me. And then you will go in and present them. November 9th, they will be going back to the street committee for the recommended prioritized project listings. From there, it'll go to TRC with, again, anticipated review and approval by regional council in January 26th of 2022. Next slide, please. And again, for this year, it's for the Pinal County Arterial Bridge. It's for funding for fiscal year 2025 only. And we have a little over $1.4 million that would be available. Next slide. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Samantha, I have a question. This is Chris Sauls with the town of Florence.
Hi, Chris.
So it is my understanding that the town's manager was on the MAG management call just, I think, about 8-10 days ago. He once again called me and he says, they're calling for projects. They specifically called out the town of Florence on this arterial bridge, a Pinal project. And I said, I'm confused. I have met with Ms. Kennedy. I've met with ADOT. I have met with everybody at MAG. Our roadway is not of the correct functional classification for those grant funds. So I'm confused why people are coming to my boss and saying is, here's your opportunity when there isn't one. Is there a disconnect on my end in understanding the requirements of this, even though I've been looking at it for 5 years?
I am not sure about that, Chris. We can look into it and have a conversation after this meeting. We can get some more details and then we can discuss this offline and I can let you know.
Chris,
we haven't made any changes to the requirements.
My assumption.
Yeah, hey, Chris, a question for you. Was there a specific project they were looking at or were they thinking of the town in general?
No, from what, well, number one, I wasn't on the phone call.
Okay.
Obviously, this is what I'm being reported back on. And it is my understanding that it was brought up because, and Samantha knows this really well, is that the town has a troublesome project in the Butte Road Bridge. And the issue is that the residents really don't use that bridge. And so it's always been a struggle for me to take her funds and use it to essentially, offset a state-run prison. And so we've worked with the state and we have received funds. Well, technically we are working on a JPA with ADOT. And I believe you're obviously aware because we did the TIP application amendment with you. So we've gotten some funds. There was concerns because of the requirements of maybe using federal dollars that we would now have to have ADOT manage the project and ADOT manage the design consultant and all the environmental. That's gone away. So we think we have enough money, but like I said, I'm just trying to make sure and understand if there are opportunities that give us a bigger budget, the town would like to look into, maybe looking at this a little bit more comprehensively. Mr. Ron Gritman is on the phone and he's had some concerns without fully scoping this project on the implementation of those two bridges right next to each other and the slight skew that is there. So if there's more money available, we would love to look into it at the very least. So I guess, Samantha, I will follow back up with you after this and just set up a meeting invite for the following week.
So Chris, one thing to clarify, and I think now you've given me enough data points, I think I can assist a little bit. The item that went through management committee that may have been what you guys were pinging off of, there was, as part of our TIP, our TIP amendment request, was the funding for the Butte Avenue Bridge replacement. So that was included in as a project change. That funding actually was allocated by the state as part of their budget bill, but MAG has a requirement to get that project located in the TIP. So you are correct, everything you stated about working with ADOT, developing the IJ, that's correct. The arterial bridge program is a separate endeavor. It is to improve roadways within the Pinal County region of MAG. If the functional classification of Butte Avenue is not high enough to qualify for that funding, that certainly would be a bit of a disconnect, but it would not mean that other roadways within the town might not be eligible if you have improvements that would be needed. But certainly if you want to chat with Samantha and myself, we'd love to talk with you.
Yeah, like I said, I think I've answered this question to my boss every year for 5 years, and every year he asks it again. So I will follow through. I'm a good employee. I will follow through. I will meet and I will respond back to him, letting him know that we've exhausted ourselves on this again.
No, not a problem. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Samantha.
Thank you, Chris.
Other questions on the arterial bridge program? If not, moving on, we'll next have Margaret Herrera, who will first be presenting the roadway safety program. Margaret.
Thank you, Patrick, and thank you everybody for attending this morning. And if we're in competition with Mr. Tate for excitement, I would argue that this is the most exciting program, as what's more exciting than putting good safety program or good safety projects in the ground in a more expedited manner. And that's what the RSP is all about. As mentioned before, you can find the application on the TIP programming page. However, if you want to access it a little bit more directly, you can go directly to the RSP webpage. That's noted there in the second bullet. And those are listed under the forms and documents, kind of towards the center of the page. Another thing I might note is there are applications from the last two cycles. We funded 2020 and 2021, as well as 2022. And examples of those applications are also provided on that webpage if you would like to take a look at those. Similar to the rest of the call for projects, the notice was sent out on August 2nd. And again, these are for near-term safety improvements to supplement the HSIP. We were able to work out utilizing her funding, so this makes it really flexible for local agencies to use a JOC that they might already have in place to get the improvements constructed. I will note as well, something that's not here on a bullet, that there is a local match, but it is the design of the project. So the construction is reimbursable, but your local match or your design is in lieu of local match, and in-kind services can also be used for that. Next slide, please. So similar again to the rest of the projects that are being presented to you today. We have September 17th for the applications to that are due at 10 a.m. One thing I will note that's different with both the safety program projects is that unfortunately at this time we don't have the nifty digital applications. We are in the queue to have our IT department develop that for safety, but we are a little bit further down in the queue. So until that time, what I would suggest that you do is make sure that your Excel-based application is complete, and that any photos or maps that you will be inserting into your Excel, that when you put it together, that it doesn't exceed your outgoing email limit. So if you might want to check that ahead of time and make sure, so that you're not sitting there at 9:59 a.m. trying to get a file to us that's 10 megabytes, and your outgoing can't handle that. So just one note of caution there. On November 16th, the Transportation Safety Committee, it's actually our regular scheduled meeting. It's not a special meeting. The application presentations will be heard by the Safety Committee on that date. And we'll also be looking at recommending a prioritized project listing. And then again, similar to all the other programs, that will go to TRC Management Committee, and then finally to Regional Council on January 26th. Next slide, please. And for, it looks like we got the slides mixed up a little bit here, but what should be highlighted here is roadway safety program. And you can see that the amount available this year is almost $2 million at about 1.86 million. Next slide, please. And I'd be happy to take, before I move on to Safe Routes to School, I'd be happy to take questions specific to the roadway safety program at this time.
Margaret, I have my hand up, so I guess I'll just start. We have an existing traffic signal next to a school and a hospital that does not meet traffic signal warrants. I don't really understand why it was ever installed. Unfortunately, it's within 560 feet of a section line road, and a development is going in there, and it is proposed to meet traffic signal warrants immediately on that. Is there any technical assistance available for this, for us to kind of study a solution for that, whether it be interconnect, whether it be removing the old signal, putting a new signal in? I understand there's a political overlay to removing a traffic signal next to a school. I do get that, but is there any technical assistance available through this for us to study this?
So not specifically through the roadway safety program. It's strictly for construction. However, we do have other programs that I would be happy to talk to you about offline. For instance, we have the local agency safety studies. That is a funding source that is open right now as well, specifically for technical assistance for things like that. So I would be happy to talk to you in more detail regarding that program.
Okay, I will send you some available times and dates after next week, early next week.
Sounds great, Chris.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All right, I think we can move on to Safe Routes to School. So similarly, you can access the Safe Routes to School applications through the TIP webpage, but again, we do have a Safe Routes to School webpage that you can reach those more directly. And again, similar to the roadway safety program, we do have available past applications so that you can get a good example of what you might be looking for. In addition to the applications, there are several resources that you can use for your application. There's a list of local agency partners, as well as there's a. I'm sorry. Okay, I'm sorry. I thought I heard a question being asked. There's also an example of a safe routes to school study, so on and so forth. So you might want to take a look at some of those resources. If there's something that you need that's not on that list, please feel free to contact me. So there's two different applications. One is for the Priority 1 Safe Routes to School studies. These studies are actually administered by MAG, and so there is no ADOT fee. In addition, the local match is the in-kind services. We expect and that both the school as well as the local agency staff will have a lot of involvement in actually developing the Safe Routes to School studies. So the time that you use to develop those studies and develop the action plans can be used as in-kind services. So for the Priority 2, those are the support activity type projects. Those would be procurement mostly. So procurement of things that would support your Safe Routes to School activities. So there have been things such as and we always get a question on this, the speed feedback signs that are successful in school areas. Those can be procured through the support activity projects. However, it would need to be installed by city forces on an existing pole. So any, if your application included any type of, moving of a teaspoon of dirt, then it probably is not good for this program. So there are other eligible type projects. One note underneath the Priority 2, the potential additional resources through ASG partnership. This refers specifically to local agencies that are seeking funding for a stipend for a Safe Routes to School coordinator. ASU is looking at getting a grant that would provide resources actually to help facilitate Safe Routes to School activities. So that would be part of that type of project as a potential. So, and these are all resources, both the studies as well as the support activity projects for K-8 schools. My understanding in the next transportation bill, I have to get some confirmation on this, but my understanding is that they're going to be opening it up to high schools as well in the future. But for right now, it still maintains for K-8 schools. Next slide, please. Okay, so my same caution with these applications, because they are the Excel-based applications, that you make sure and check the size of that so that you can get it in at 10 a.m. and no late applications will be accepted. Similar to the RSP, at the same meeting, the Transportation Safety Committee will hear presentations from the applicants and potentially provide a recommendation for the prioritized list of projects. The rest of the schedule is similar to all the other calls for projects that will eventually end up at Regional Council on January 26th of 2022. Next slide, please. All right, so as you can see here, the Transportation Alternative Safe Routes to School, the amount available is $400,000. One thing I might note here is that we have a soft allocate or sub-allocation, not quite sure if that's the correct word, but because the priority 1 Safe Route to School projects are indeed Priority 1, we provide a little bit more funding in $300,000 for the Safe Routes to School studies, and then $100,000 for the support activity type projects. Next slide, please. And with that, I will take any questions for Safe Routes to School.
Margaret, this is Ward Stanford with Avondale. My apologies, I'm constantly getting tugged in and out of this presentation. What could you quickly run over again what the safety funds can be used for related to Safe Routes to School?
Sure, if we could go back a couple of slides. Back one more. Great, thank you. So the priority one is for the Safe Routes to School studies, which you're
Studies, yes.
very, very familiar with, as Abigail has done several Safe Routes to School studies. Were you referring specifically to the support activity type projects?
It may be, you know, as far as all the things that we have found to try and fund and improve, can any of this money be utilized for any of those type of physical projects?
Potentially, but keep in mind too that these are all non-infrastructure. So these would be educational materials, support for getting a website up and running to provide more resources and education for your schools and parents, things like that. So you may have in the suite of action plans that you have developed in previous cycles for Safe Routes to School studies, there may be some of those strategies or action items that are under education or enforcement. Those could potentially be funded with the priority to support activity project funding.
Okay, that helps a lot. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, any other questions for Margaret? All right, thank you, Margaret, very, very much. And finally, moving it over to Jeff Jenk. He's now going to present the SM&O call for projects. Jeff?
Thank you, Patrick. Thanks everyone for attending today's workshop. This particular part of the call for project is on the system management and operations, aka ITS projects. To provide a little background, that MAG ITS committee developed a system management and operation plan back in late 2018. And in that plan, there were specific projects identified for the regional agencies. And this call for project is really a sequel from the last call for project that took place in 2019, that we programmed the first 3 years of the 5-year worth of project identified in the system management and operation plan. So the notice of call for project was sent out August 2nd, and a few highlights of this call for project. Basically, it followed the same convention as the last go around, with the exception of that we have conducted a series of working group meetings involving all the ITS committee members to explicitly talk about the evaluation, the applications, and certain ground rule. One of the major changes from last go around is that there will be no project level caps in the spirit of call for project. Also, what's unique to this SM&O call for project is that the fundings are available in 3 priority buckets, and we will talk about more detail in the later slide. Again, the application is a Excel spreadsheets, and there are very specific requirements that, in terms of submittal, you email as well as putting in to the Dropbox, for instance, as a redundancy measure. And in that application form, there are multiple tabs. One of the tabs, since our funding source for this call for project is CMAQ, one tab is exclusively dealing with the necessary input for air quality evaluations. Next slide, please. So important dates, the due date, of course, is September 17th, but please save the date for all ITS committee members. on October 6th, you'll be required to present your proposed projects. And out of those presentations, the members of ITS committee will be asked to rate and score these projects based on the qualitative scores. And another important date is on December 1st, we will have a rank order list to recommend on the ITS committee meeting. And finally, the ultimate approval of these projects will take place January 26th of 2022. Next slide, please. So this shows that the SM&O call for project has a total of $22 million. And in the next slide, we will explain the different priority buckets that made up to this $22 million budget. So when you propose, you have to specifically specify which priority bucket that the proposal is for. The three priority buckets are the integrated corridor management, and the specific requirements being it has to be within the 2-mile buffers of a freeway corridors. That priority bucket is in support of the coordination between the freeway and arterial operations. And the second bucket is the regional priority arterials. Again, there were very specific definition of what those corridor segments are, and it's contained in one of the tabs in the application form, something you need to abide to when you propose these projects. So for the first bucket, we have about 5.3 million. The second bucket is $14 million. And finally, the third bucket are for the local priority corridors, and with the budget of $3.3 million. So if you already, when you receive that application form, you will find that there are very specific requirements for this go around. For instance, we required you to submit a GIS shapefile, and that's part of the effort to automate some of the calculation of some quantitative measure, which in the past we asked agency to provide an average, say, AADT number for the project area. But in this go around with the GIS shapefile, we will be able to just run it through with our regional database for AADT and come up with that number, which is more objective. So please pay close attention to these requirements, and we still have time before September 17th. Feel free to reach out to the TISMO group for any questions that you might have. Thank you.
Any questions for Jeff on the SM&O call for projects? All right, thank you, Jeff. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to put together some final thoughts on the call. As you've seen it, I think we emphasized it enough. September 17th is obviously the critical date, 10 o'clock in the morning. No late applications will be accepted. Certainly, as my panel members have emphasized, if you can get the applications in early, that's ideal. As only 3 of the applications are online, Margaret really mentioned it, Jeff as well. If double check the file size, ensure you can get the file over to us. If you're having issues, reach out to myself or the subject matter expert within that call, and we'll certainly work with the agency to ensure that the files get over here and that we get the application recorded as being accepted on time. Other than that, any other questions, general questions, questions in general? Gonna say I'm not seeing anything in the chat pod. No one with their hands up. If you think of something, obviously we will have the open house next Tuesday at 1 in the afternoon. You can certainly bring that question there. Or if you have a question and you just think of it offline, certainly send it in and we'll get that information out and make sure we make it available to everyone so that that information is out there for everyone to see. And with that, I would like to thank everyone for attending. We had a tremendous turnout, and I would like to thank all of my panel members for providing really great presentations. Thank you all so much. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, Patrick. Good seeing you again.
Thanks all.
Thank you.